Good evening, everybody. We're going to make a start now on our joint History and Parks Institute research seminar event. I'm Joan Tumblety of the History Department, and I'm the MC for this evening. So shortly I'll be handing over to my colleague, Professor Mark Cornwall, to introduce our speaker, Professor Ivo Goldstein, who will give a paper of maybe 45 minutes, leaving plenty of time for us to have questions and discussions. So I'm just going to talk you through the protocol before I hand over to Mark and we get started with the event proper. So please make sure that, as usual, everybody do have your microphones off and your cameras off. We are recording this event too, as you will have seen. There is the option for a live transcript. If you want subtitles, as it were, you can enable that through the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen. And equally, if you want to have them turned off, if they have been turned on for you, you can just press it again to remove them. Please, while you're listening to the speaker, feel free to put any question you have or comment in the chat. And I will be chairing the discussion after we hear Professor Goldstein's paper. So I'll hand over now to my colleague, Mark.
Thank you very much, Joan. It's a great pleasure for us to welcome Professor Ivo Goldstein to speak to us. And this is part of our ongoing partnership between the University of Southampton and the University of Zagreb, which has been very beneficial to both sides in the last couple of years. I'll just say a little bit about our speaker. He's one of the most prestigious Croatian historians, educated in the old Yugoslavia. He did his PhD at the University of Belgrade, and his work, his publications span from medieval to modern. Since the 1990s, he's been focusing on Croatian history of the 20th century, and based at the University of Zagreb. But I should say he has many other strings to his bow. For example, from 2013 to 2017, he was Croatia's ambassador to France and to UNESCO. He is a prolific historian in terms of his publications. I'm just going to mention really a few of them because it would take us all evening otherwise. 1995, he published a book on Croatian early Middle Ages. He then moved very much into the 20th century. 1999, he published a General History of Croatia, which is in its 3rd edition. 2004, he published a book called Jews in Zagreb, 1918 to 1941, which I have here, a huge book. It's an incredible reference manual on the subject. And most significant for tonight, in 2001, he published a book about the Holocaust in Zagreb, and that this was translated into English in 2016. He's also written books about Tito's Yugoslavia, and about the Ustasha camp at Jasenovac. So it's great pleasure to welcome him, and he's going to talk about the Holocaust in Croatia. So over to you, Ivo.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much to all your collaborators and to University of Southampton. I think it's really a fruitful cooperation between two universities. And as you said, I will speak about the Holocaust in the so-called independent state of Croatia, or ISC, from 1941 till 1945. So after the Nazis and their allies attacked Yugoslavia in April 1941, the so-called ISC, or independent state of Croatia, has been established. The power was taken by the Croatian radical movement named Ustasha, under the leadership of Ante Pavelić. The new political and state authorities were organized very quickly. Ustasha established new order, Neue Ordnung, mirrored on the contemporary Italian-German model and featuring the cult of the nation, the state, and the leader. Their program in June 1941 expressed the totalitarian idea most concisely. In the Ustasha state created by the Poglavnik and his Ustasha, people must think like Ustasha, speak like Ustasha, and what is the most important, act like Ustasha. In one word, the entire life in the ISC must be an Ustasha-based life. And please, image number 1, Croatia today. Just to have general understanding of what it is about, where Croatia is, it's on the Adriatic Sea. On the other side of the Adriatic Sea is Italy, then Slovenia and Austria on the north, Hungary, northwest Hungary on the north, and Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro on the eastern side, which is usually called the Balkans. Now we are going back to 1941. So next image, and we have now independent state of Croatia, which was founded in April 1941. It was, in fact, it was not independent. It was a puppet regime governed mostly by the Germans and the Italians. Italians already took over parts of Slovenia and parts of Dalmatian littoral, as you see here, and were very much influencing the politics, everyday life in this Italian zone of East interest, which is beyond this line. In the northern part, there was German occupation zone. Nevertheless, although the Germans and the Italians, or the fascists and the Nazis, had great influence on the politics in the independent state of Croatia, they were leaving, mostly the Germans, they were leaving regarding the Holocaust, the Ustasha to do their job. So from its foundation at the beginning of the 30s, the Ustasha movement was radically nationalistic and extremely intolerant of any kind of Yugoslav idea and the Serbs. They wanted an independent Croatia with a pure living space. As the ties between the Ustasha and the German Nazis grew stronger, and Ustasha ideology grew closer to that of the German Nazis, they adopted racist, anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic theories. In the late 30s, anti-Semitic outbursts in the right-wing Croatian press grew more and more frequent, and the most of the authors later joined the Ustasha movement. Next image, please. So you see, these are anti-Semitic caricatures in the so-called Revolverblatt. These are magazines or journals which were practically only dealing with the anti-Semitic presentations of the Jews. You see, they are in the same time presented as the biggest capitalists, as the members of Freemason organizations, and as the communists. So communists, capitalists, and Freemasons. Anti-Semitism is irrational. It's in the same time they are accusing Jews of being the biggest capitalists and the biggest communists. It's irrational, but it doesn't. The science, the history cannot explain anti-Semitism in a rational manner. That's, I would say, that's the basic message we can deliver to the public. So next image, please. This is another one where the Jews with the specific Jewish nose are saying that we are distributing our net throughout the world, etc., etc. So these are anti-Semitic hysteria, I would say, which was preparing the Croatian public for 1941 and for the Holocaust. So when ISC has been founded, about 2,000 sworn Ustasha were in the country. They made the backbone of the new government, and people immediately flocked to join the movement. So that by May, in next month or two, it already had 100,000 members who had sworn the Ustasha oath. The Ustasha had more sympathizers in the lower, less educated classes and in some poor regions of the Dinaric Mountains, where Serbs and Croats lived mixed. Many people were also pleased by the fact that the ISC included Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, disappointment soon set in and sympathy evaporated. During the following months and years, more and more Croats were distancing from the Ustasha regime. In autumn 41, resistance fighters organized themselves into companies, battalions, and detachments that they called Partisans. As the war was coming to its end, the anti-fascist struggle in Croatia and Yugoslavia became stronger and stronger. They liberated the country almost without foreign help and became true representatives of the various Yugoslav nations. In the Croatian case, it means that the Partisans, instead of Ustasha, were representing Croats during the Second World War and after it. Nevertheless, the Croatian society witnessed a dramatical schism, which is obvious till our times between the Ustasha and the Partisans. Well, I'm going back to the Ustasha. Following the example of the Nazis, from whom they frequently received instructions, the Ustasha added to their plans for killing Serbs even more severe measures against the Jews. All this was planned in advance and resembled the German plans that involved three stages. First was excommunication, then concentration, and then extermination, which is, the plan is very well known from general historiography. In the genocide perpetrated against the Jews in the ISC from 41 to 45, between 75 and 80% of the Jews on the territory of the present-day Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina were killed. There was nevertheless, there was nothing in previous Croatian history to indicate that such a crime might be committed. In Croatia, in the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, there were anti-Semitic pamphlets and incidents. Anti-Semitic pamphlets were published. There were certain incidents. There were even political parties with anti-Semitic tendencies in their ideology or their programs. But anti-Semitism has never reached extreme forms, pogroms and murders seen, for example, in Poland or in Russia. Racial laws were also, only a few days after his arrival in Zagreb, on 22nd of April 41, the newly appointed Minister of Interior, Andrija Tukovic, stated that the government of the ISC would soon solve the Jewish question in the same way in which the German government had solved it, stressing that the most stringent measures would be taken to see that racial laws will be strictly enforced in the near future. In early May, Ante Pavelic, the leader, so-called Poglavnik, gave the same statement. The Jewish question will be radically solved according to our racial and economic position. So next image, please. And this is one of the publications, Hrvatski radnik, Croatian worker, and the title, I will just translate it. Throughout the history of mankind, Jews have never been considered the enemies. Jews were always considered the enemies of every nation. Next image, please. Then another one. The strictest measures should be taken against the Jews, etc., etc. You have hundreds of titles, and then the texts during these not months but weeks before the racial laws have been introduced. So in the meantime, on 30th April, racial laws have been introduced, And for example, one of them, there were three of them, one of them was legal provision on the protection of the Aryan blood and honor of the Croatian people, which banned marriages between Jews or other persons of non-Aryan origin and persons of Aryan origin. Jews couldn't get around this provision the way Serbs, for example, could. Serbs were Orthodox and they were able to convert to the Catholic faith. The Jews couldn't get around because the status of the Jews was clearly defined by the provision on racial affiliation. So the Jewish question in the Croatian, in the Ustasha case, was never a religious one, it was racial. All Jews over in next couple of weeks, it was ordered that all Jews over 6 years of age had to wear a yellow sign in public. So next, please, next image. So this is the title is "The Jews are obliged to wear a Jewish sign," and there is an address where the Jews in Zagreb have to go and pick up their sign. And at the end, there is a warning at the end. So not obey the order will be severely punished. In June, that means a couple of weeks after this, the Racial Political Committee was established within the Ministry of the Interior with the major aim of establishing racial affiliation, especially in dubious cases. At the same time, under the legal provision on the protection of the national and Aryan culture of the Croatian people, Jews were banned from participating in work of various organizations and institutions, sports and cultural life of the Croatian people in general, and especially in literature, journalism, arts, and music, town planning, the theater, and the film. So next picture, please. And that was this order that Jews were banned to participate in the building of the popular and Aryan culture, and particularly it is forbidden in the case of literature, journalism, art, music, urbanism, etc., etc. So one of the signatures, one of those who signed this document was Minister of Education Mile Budak, who was also a well-known Croatian writer. And the discussion whether he was only a writer or a war criminal goes on even till nowadays. The radical circles, nationalistic circles, insist on that his work in literature, his books should be taken as they are, as a good literature. In fact, he was a bad writer, but this is something what resembles to the discussion whether Knut Hamsun in the Norwegian case was only collaborator of the Nazis, or should be seen only collaborator of the Nazis, or also a writer. I think that Hamsun was much better writer than Budak was, but we have that problem, and the problem of historical revisionism is still very present in nowadays Croatia, particularly in these nationalistic circles on the right. Another next image, please. So the title here says that Jews are forbidden to enter cafes, restaurants, and inns. And I think that very important is the context in which this information is presented, because here on the right you have the information, you have a text about the first football game in the new independent state of Croatia, and you have another one, another information about the theater piece in the center of Zagreb, and week of Croatian music and drama. So it was, I would say, this pogrom against the persecution of the Jews was something what was for the publishers of this Hrvatski narod, this Croatian people, that was the central newspapers in those times at the beginning of the Ustasha regime. So for them, persecution of the Jews was an information as the others. It was something normal. And the anti-Semitic propaganda before the war, at the beginning, after the beginning of the war, after the foundation of the independent state of Croatia, was preparing for that normalization of the Holocaust. And this is 21st of April, just 10 days after the foundation of the ISC. That means that Ustasha were very, very quick, even quicker than the Nazis. And they wanted to show that they are loyal collaborators of the Nazis. They were afraid that the Nazis will be suspicious because they were closer at the beginning, before the war, they were closer to the Italians. So that was something what the Holocaust, of course, in Croatia, in the independent state of Croatia, happened in a very specific context, which one should understand. And unfortunately, I don't think that we have too much time to try to analyze all these aspects, but I'm just saying or giving you information that there is a problem of complexity of this process. Almost from the beginning of the Ustasha state, the authorities cast an eye on Jewish and Serbian, it has to be underlined, and Serbian property. Thus, special legal provisions were enacted according to which Jewish movables and real estate were qualified as state-owned. In other words, looting was possible in the name of the state. However, in practice, there was even more open robbery carried out by the officials of the regime. Although from time to time, views were expressed that such acts were illegal.
Hello again, everybody. Obviously, we've had some major technological issue here. We can't get hold of the speaker, and it's a real shame because we're in full flight and only about halfway through the talk. We're hoping that he may be able to rejoin us, but so far it doesn't look promising. I'm not sure we can conduct a full discussion in the absence of the speaker because we won't have anybody to answer the questions. But I wonder, Mark, if you want to unmute yourself and put your camera on, Mark Cornwall. And we just want to say to everybody that we can sort of pull together any questions or comments that you do have. And I don't know, Mark, if you want to comment on anything that we've heard so far.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's a pity because we are in full flood. And I think what will be interesting in any discussion on this is the way that we're approaching, the audience will be approaching this from many different angles. And those who have been often attending the Park seminars will be coming at this from a very particular point of view. I suppose I myself are coming at this much more from a kind of Croatian point of view. And I felt what was fascinating was already when he made the links with present day nationalist or extreme right-wing thinking in Croatia, when he talked about the character of Mile Budak, who was, you know, a very well-known figure in Croatian mid-20th century history. I think mainly because he had a long career as a writer in the 20 years or so before he took part in the Ustasha state. So it's a rather interesting So I was very interested in that, and I was also very interested in Ivo was effectively saying there were no precedents in Croatian history. So I was going to ask him something about that, about the possible nuances of anti-Semitism going back into the 19th century, certainly. I had other questions about interaction with Nazi ideology, but others will be more competent to ask questions on that point. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, and from my point of view, thinking about this, I guess comparatively, the Western European case, and in particular, the occupation of France. I mean, what strikes me is, first of all, the similarities in what we've been hearing about the implementation of laws to exclude Jews from society. The anti-Semitic iconography is, I think, virtually indistinguishable from what you could read in the more extreme anti-Semitic and ultra-collaborationist newspapers in Paris from 1940 to 1944, the whole period. And I guess I started to have questions about continuities as well on the far right, and also in terms of anti-Semitic ideology. And I was also hoping to hear a bit more about where the treatment of Serbians fits in to the story as well. We do have a couple of hands went up, and could I ask that Shelby Shapiro, I think, wants to ask a question?
Yeah,
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm curious as to what the size of the Jewish population was in Croatia at the time. What percentage, not only was it a couple of 100,000, was it X percent? Get some idea of the situation of Jews in Croatia.
Yeah, I can say a little bit. I think it is a very small percentage of the population, but I was going to ask about whether it was very much an urban population around Zagreb. I think that is the case. There is a question in the chat which I could have a go at as well. It's probably testing me a bit, but the position of the role of the Catholic Church is very interesting and sensitive issue. Key figure here is Archbishop Stepinac, who did not speak out forcefully at all against what was happening, and was then put on trial by the Tito regime after the war and effectively locked up until 1960, but then was very much rehabilitated, particularly in the 1990s onwards. And if you go to Zagreb Cathedral, you'll find him lying in state there. It's a very interesting case of a sensitive figure, but taken on very much by the Tudjman regime in the 1990s as a national hero. So there's a good example of somebody who it's a very problematic person in terms of his experience, his behavior in the under the Ustasha regime. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. We do have some questions or comments. Apologies if I'm getting you out of the right order, but I wonder if we could hear from Sue Lieberman, and then Neil Gregor, and then Ranka.
Right. Hi. This is me, Sue Lieberman. I wonder. I'm just kind of speculating on the degree to which what happened in Croatia is kind of reflection of something already embedded in Croatian society, or is kind of more an expression of the kind of geopolitics of the time, and where it was more kind of expeditious to kind of locate your loyalties, or however you might call that. As I understand it from some of my reading and exposure to this history, there has been a kind of historic divide between particularly Croatia and Serbia, and that Croatia tended to look west, was Catholic, as we can see, it used the Roman script. Serbia looked eastwards, with Orthodox, used the Cyrillic script. and there's kind of already some, as far as I can tell, some kind of political divide between the sort of the two nationalities, the two principal nationalities within the Balkans. And of course the whole history of the Balkans was extremely fractured at this time. So that's my kind of wonder. And I also have understood that that what happened in Jasenovac was also very bitterly expressed towards or against Serbs by the Croats who ran the camp. Sorry, that's a bit of a muddle, but I think you kind of might get the general question.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think this is the first time I've tried to chair or moderate a discussion where we haven't actually had the speaker. So I kind of am feeling, thank you for your question. We'll leave that hanging, and I think I might ask Neil to come in, and I realise that Lovro may have comments as well, but I think we should take Neil and then Ranka, and then perhaps Lovro, if you have something to say, that'd be great to hear from you then. So Neil?
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of, just to make your job even harder, Joan, it's a sort of halfway between a comment and a question, really. So it can just dangle in the air for you. But, you know, obviously one doesn't know where the paper was kind of going to go. But I was sort of struck that it was a very, I mean, what we heard thus far, a very perpetrator-centric account. About the, you know, the relations between the sort of the framing presence of the Germans, and then the agency and the mindsets and sort of ideological dispositions of the Ustasha. And no doubt there's a conversation to be had about the extent to which the genocide draws on deeper seated kind of hostilities to Jews in the region, and the extent to which it sort of erupts as a comparatively sort of short-term, you know, maelstrom of violence. I have to say I was a little bit surprised to hear about the sort of weakness of the indigenous anti-Semitic traditions there, though I can't gainsay the argument. My point anyway was really that it was to ask from a perspective of ignorance about the main sort of recent historiographical moves in Eastern European Holocaust history, because so much of the literature these days is actually moved away from thinking about perpetrators and has become far more interested in Jewish experience. You know, I mean, for example, I sat and read as one of the sort of judges on the GSA's Sybil Milton Prize last year, and we got given a pile of 30 books to read about, you know, recent work on the Holocaust, and not one of them was actually about perpetrators. It was all very much about Jewish experiences in different towns, or Jewish experiences of displacement, or being a refugee, or reconstituting Jewish communities after 1945, and so on. And I'd be just curious to hear whether any of that wider move in the historiography of the Holocaust in general is reproducing itself in the scholarship that's going on in this case study. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it may well be that there are people listening who want to, you know, respond to your question or Sue's question, anybody's question, but if we let that comment in question just dangle, as you say, for a little bit, and hear from Ranka and then Lovro, and then we can perhaps open it up to ask if anybody wants to comment. So yes, Ranka.
Hi, I'm Ranka Primorat. Sorry, my name's not on my Zoom. Sorry, I don't know how to use Zoom. This is just to put my question into the pool of questions for whenever we come around to talking about this again. For me, the talk cut off at the worst possible moment, because Ivo was stressing the racial angle, the racial definition, the racial understanding of anti-Semitism in the ISC, and I'd never given this any thought at all before. I grew up in Croatia, but I'm not an academic of the Balkans. And that was striking to me because I'm in the early stages of developing with colleagues from history at Southampton, a project on Tito's and Yugoslav non-alignment as an implicit theory of race. That is to say, as an implicit theory of non-racist whiteness. So I wanted to ask Ivo if you could comment, if you could talk about the possible links, in other words, whether non-alignment was a conscious and emphatic reaction to this Aryan philosophy that was developed in the ISC during World War II. It probably went hand in hand with socialism, communism, obviously, but I don't know whether this was programmatic and to what extent. Thanks.
Thank you, Branka. Lovro, would you like to come in and comment?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm probably not properly dressed for this talk. I was just thought I would be in the background and hear what Professor Goldstein had to say. But I might jump in and give you some of the limited answers if Professor Goldstein doesn't come back, because I'm doing a PhD on anti-Semitism in the Ustasha movement at the Central European University in Vienna and Budapest. So if I can help, I'll try to jump in. But just to answer to one question which was raised before about the percentage or kind of the number of the Jewish population in Croatia. So in 1941, when the independent state of Croatia was created, the country had about 6.5 million total population, and Jews constituted there were around 40,000 Jews. But the number is a bit tricky to work with because officially the religious community counted 32,000 and the rest are pretty much targeted by the racial laws. So not all of the remaining Jews actually self-identified as Jewish. So approximately like 20% of the people who were persecuted did not necessarily self-identify as religious Jews, or at least that's what we know from the books of the Jewish religious communities across the country. And just to answer a point which Neil raised earlier of why there is so much focus on the perpetrators is that in Croatia, the theoretical models and the approach from the perpetrator studies wasn't really applied so heavily onto the case study of the independent state of Croatia. So there's a lot of open questions which still we are working through as a historiography, because you need to understand Holocaust studies as a modern field with its traditions from Hilberg to Browning, Goldhagen, and so on, only entered into the Croatian historiography in the late 90s. And that's pretty much a one-man job with Ivo Goldstein. So it's a still developing historiography, which has very important contributions for the European case study as well. If we take, into consideration very recently, some of the international historiography recognized the importance of Croatia so Croatia, Romania, and Nazi Germany are identified as the three only countries who actually created their own policy of destruction of the Jewish population inside their own borders. So in Croatia, the Holocaust is primarily a Ustasha matter. 75% of all Jews killed during the Holocaust were killed in Croatian camps, which were not under any sort of supervision by the SS or any other German agency. So that's a very important case study to basically even test some of the theories, such as intentionalism, functionalism, for example, on other case studies. So how does the decision-making look in Croatia in comparison to Nazi Germany? Which theories work, which do not? There's an open question of where did anti-Semitism come from? And I'm really happy that a lot of people raised this point. How much is it the continuity from the 19th century? How much of it is it a kind of an intellectual or ideological transfer from Nazi Germany or other countries? So these are still pretty much open questions. And that's why I think there is so much focus on the perpetrators, because they're very important questions which we just don't have answers to.
Thank you very much. We still haven't heard from our speaker. So we were expecting some disruption from Ivo's dog, but this is unanticipated. Would anybody like Mark Cornwall again, or indeed anybody else want to come in and comment, as Lovro just had? Anybody who wants to offer a response to the question or comment we've had thus far?
I only wanted to ask Sue Lieberman if she would just kind of sum up what her question was again.
It was to do with whether one can understand what happened in Croatia as emanating from something that was already deep-seated in Croatian society or thinking or ideology, or whether it was something that was part of the independent states' kind of power positioning in relation to, you know, the wider power structures in Europe at the time. So basically orienting towards, or perception of the need to orient towards Nazi ideology rather than, say, Soviet ideology, for example.
Yeah, that's probably rather an enormous question. I'd probably answer it by saying something about the roots of the Ustasha ideology, which it is acknowledged. I mean, Lovro might correct me on this a little bit, but acknowledged as being deep-seated back in 19th century Great Croatian, the thoughts of Greater Croatia. For example, the Frank Party of the late 19th century, ironically, in terms of the fact that Josef Frank was Jewish and converted, that's rather interesting. But the Frank Party was fully in favor of a Greater Croatia, which did not acknowledge the existence of Serbs, simply thought that Serbs were happened to be Orthodox Christians who were, you know, who converted from Catholicism to Orthodoxy. So they did not acknowledge that Serbs actually existed. So that kind of thinking is very deep-seated, going back into the 19th century. It's very easy to see the realities of why a fascist movement like the Ustasha coming into power felt that it had the possibility to achieve a radical solution against the Serbs, and put this into place very quickly. I think one of my questions really was going to be on the anti-Semitic dimension, how far that was whether that was so part of the Ustasha ideology. The anti-Serb ideology is absolutely fundamental. Clearly, the geopolitical change from 1939 onwards simply gives the possibility for this movement to come into power. But what has usually been written about this in historiography is it is so dependent on being propped up by the German and Italian occupiers. It couldn't survive on its own. I think that would be the case, and actually collapses by 1944-45 when the Italians withdraw, essentially. I might defer to Lovro as to whether he wants to add or whether correct what I've said there.
No, I think you're perfectly right, but so there's like two ways of looking where this anti-Semitism is coming from. One is to take this idea from the 19th century, where you're perfectly correct, where this imagined idea of an ethnically cleansed state comes from. So there's this universal enmity towards foreigners as foreigners, towards non-Croats. And one way of looking at anti-Semitism, the Professor Goldstein is back, so I would not take anything away from him. No.
You can finish your sentence, Lovro, that's fine.
Yeah, so there is this continuity from the 19th century, but then on the other hand, there's an intensification of the transfer of ideology in the late 30s, exactly because of this geopolitical kind of atmosphere and the need to modernize the ideology. So the Ustasha press is always saying that we need to modernize this old anti-Semitic and all that old kind of nationalisms from the 19th century, and they see international fascism as something very modern that they should aspire to, which brings more collective action than the old nationalism from the 19th century. So apologies, Professor Goldstein, while you were gone, I tried to answer a couple of questions which were in the audience, and we didn't know whether you would come back. So I didn't want to take anything away from your lecture.
You're on mute, Ivo. You unmute yourself. Brilliant.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. So I think you'll be very proud of your audience, Ivo. There've been several questions. We've had quite a nice discussion, conversation in your absence. So for some reason, your paper cut out halfway through. There are a number of questions that have come in, which I think have been partially sort of addressed and worked through in the discussion. But I suppose I could ask you, I mean, would you like to, I don't know, summarize the second half of your paper? It would be good if we had an indication of where you were going, the main points that you wanted to leave us with.
Well, first of all, I don't know, it never happened to me. I had tens, maybe hundreds of Zoom meetings or similar meetings throughout these pandemic years, and it never happened. Suddenly, I saw that you are not changing the images, and then I realized that something went wrong. But as a matter of fact, I continued to speak for another 5 or 10 minutes, coming to an end, and then I saw that saw your email. So to summarize, and we have something like 15 or so minutes, I would say that it was a terrible chapter in the Croatian history. Some 75 to maybe to 80% of the Jewish community didn't survive the war. The rest survived because they saved themselves. Some of them were saved. It resembled to a miracle. And there is one specificity which I have to underline regarding the Holocaust and those who saved the Jews of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and some Jews of Serbia, and that was anti-fascist struggle. Anti-fascist struggle, partisans led by Marshal Tito. Out of 9,000 Jews who survived the Holocaust in the Ustasha state, out of 39,000 who lived before the war, on this territory, so 9,000 or so survived the Holocaust. Half of them survived due to the partisans. Some 2,300 Jews became partisans and showed that they are not only those members of that community which is led to Auschwitz without saying nothing or trying to make some kind of resistance, to create some kind of resistance, but took the rifles, took the weapons, and tried to fight for freedom and to survive. And out of these Jews, 2,300, more than 800 were killed in the anti-fascist struggle. And then another 2,000 or more were civilians, Jewish civilians, elderly, women, children, who were not participating in the struggle directly, but were working as in the administration on the liberated territory, in the hospitals, etc., etc. So half of the Jewish population of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina survived due to the partisans. I think partisans, and this is something what is unique in the European history, unique in the history of Holocaust. Maybe one can compare it with the liberated territory in the Soviet Union, where the Jews survived, but of course they were backed by the Red Army, and it's not definitely the same situation. This is one thing. The other thing is, I think that Lovro started, when I joined, I heard Lovro speaking about the historical revisionism, and this historical revisionism is another Croatian bad and sad specificity. Well, it's not specificity because you have it all around Eastern Europe, and this is something what is said. We are trying to resist and to confront this visionism and neo or Ustashos nostalgia or neo-Ustashism with logical arguments, historical arguments. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but these visionists are using all kind of weapons against historical truths. They are using, and they are held by some people even in the government, in the Catholic Church. This is something what can be compared with the other countries of former Yugoslavia. Partially, it is the result of the war which we had in the beginning of the 90s. Partially, it is something what is the result of lack of information during the socialistic times about the bad or inappropriate things which were committed, crimes even, which were committed by the partisans in the Second World War. So it's a very complex thing. But for the moment, speaking about the Holocaust, we have to speak about, and the culture of memory regarding the Holocaust, we unfortunately have to speak about the political, historical revisionism, which is very vivid and very strong, and which is some kind in Western culture. We also speaking, we have this term negationism. Yes, we have negationism as well, but we are mostly confronted with revisionism. I think it's for our particular situation more appropriate would be the term revisionism.
Thank you so much for summarising the rest of the talk and emphasising some key points, Professor Goldstein. We've got a few minutes left. I wonder if I could just call on any audience member to raise their hand or put a question in the chat, and that includes people who've already raised questions in your absence who might want to reframe them or indeed just ask them again of the speaker. Yes, Renke.
If nobody else wants to ask, if we have time, and if so, hi, Professor Goldstein. This is Ranka Primorac. I work at Southampton. It's lovely to see you here. I wonder if I can start a conversation with you, maybe to continue later via email, because it's a big topic, about the extent to which Tito's non-alignment and his policy on deliberate policy of international non-racism may have been a conscious reaction to the pronounced racism of ICS that you've just spoken about. It's huge, I know. It's huge, I know. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't understand your question. Sorry. Tito's non-alignment policy was well. It has good and bad aspects. Tito tried to avoid the pressure of the Soviet Union, but as a communist, he didn't want to get closer to the West. In the meantime, he became close to some regimes, including Arab regimes, which were anti-Semitic, and Yugoslavia was one of the rare European states which in 1970, early 70s, voted for this resolution of Zionism as being one concept of or being racism or adequate to racism, which was of course shameful, and I think everything what one would say about Zionism and the Israeli internal and foreign policy cannot be understood as racism. So that was one bad chapter in the Yugoslav foreign policy, but as a matter of fact, it didn't much didn't made any or didn't make any big pressure on the position of the Jews in socialistic Yugoslavia. Jews after 1976, yes, the situation. There were some anti-Semitic incidents as they were not before 1967, before the Six Days War. But generally, comparing the position of the Jews, Yugoslav Jews in Yugoslavia, comparing with other Eastern European countries, it was much different. Yugoslav Jewry had the opportunity to communicate and to cooperate with Israel, with Jewish organizations throughout the world, American Jewish organizations. People were traveling to America, and American representatives of the Jewish organizations were coming, although there were no, after 1967, diplomatic relations between Yugoslavia and Israel. But I think that the things were in that particular context quite acceptable. I don't know whether this is
it's extremely helpful. Thank you very much. It's huge help. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, you can mail. Okay. Yeah, you can send me an email and we can communicate afterwards. It won't be a problem.
There's a couple of questions that have come in the chat. Meanwhile, if I can put them to you one after the other, Ivo. Neil Gregor has asked if you could say something about the experiences of Jews in the immediate post-war period. Has this been researched yet? For instance, the re-establishment of communities or not, relations between Jews and non-Jews?
Well, yes, I think in the last 20 years, there is I can't say huge bibliography, many texts, many papers written about this period, but there are certain doctorate theses, there are certain analyses written both in Belgrade and Zagreb about not only about Serbian or Croatian Jewry, but about Yugoslav Jewry. And I think that this chapter of history is better known now and quite known now, and the role of the Foundation of Israel regarding the Yugoslav Jewry. So I think that before 1990, the Jewish history was something what was in a way marginalized in socialistic Yugoslavia. That was something what people thought is there is no interest. In the meantime, 30 years elapsed. It is quite well known, and I think that, of course, many things are still under question. But generally speaking, we have certain information about that. Yeah, and I can, if somebody has interest, I can send him or send her a list of publications which would clearly, of course, mostly in Serbian or in Croatian. That is maybe for some people a problem in Britain, of course.
We've got another couple of questions. I might just, because we're nearing the end of our time, ask them both at once. Edward Cheney has asked about the persecution of Croatian Jews in comparison with persecution of Gypsies, recognizing that 28,000 Gypsies were exterminated within the Ustasha state, but are there distinctions to be drawn between Muslim Gypsies and Orthodox Karakalaks? So that's one question. And the last question that's come in is simply about what languages did Croatian Jews speak? Croatian, Yiddish, etc., others.
Okay, yeah. Speaking about the Gypsies and the Roma population, I can say proudly that in last 15 years or so, or even more, almost 20 years, the first book about the Holocaust against the Gypsies in the independent state of Croatia was published by late Professor Lengel Krizman, Narcisa Lengel Krizman, and that was the first basic information about the Holocaust or the genocide against the Gypsies, which was almost completely unknown. In those times, for example, on the list of Jasenovac's victims, we had only 1,400, maybe 1,500 Gypsies named. Today, we have 16,000 Gypsies names of the male, female, and even kids killed in Jasenovac. So this is only one of information which shows that we know much more and that we have specialists, particularly in Croatia, who are dealing with the genocide against the Gypsies. Of course, it is a problem because we lack documents. We lack documents regarding the pre-war period and then during the war, but people are working, and I think that in that compared with some 20 years ago, we know a lot. The last question is about the language. Language is Croatian. Of course, Croatian and Serbian and Bosnian, the Jewish community are well integrated and assimilated for many generations. Although the grandfathers and great-grandfathers or great-grandmothers came mostly, speaking about the Ashkenazi community, from the other parts of Austro-Hungarian Empire. In those times, their mother language was German, mostly German, and then Hungarian. And regarding the Bosnian Jewry, where predominantly Sephardic community was living, they spoke, the older generation spoke Ladino. Ladino are language of the Sephardic community, very close to Spanish. So today, the problem is always when we speak about the language, which is the second language which is spoken by the Jewish community. Maybe 80 or 100 years ago, it was, of course, German. It was not the foreign language, it was the second language. Today, for everybody almost in Croatia who is educated, the second language, not the foreign language, is English. So it is the same for the Jewish community, for the little tiny Jewish community today in Croatia.
Thank you very much. I think at this point, if we have grilled you, I'm inclined to hand back to Mark Cornwall, who I see has a question for you himself. Mark will say a few words in conclusion before we close the event. So thank you very much. I'm very glad that we found you again and that you came back and have been such a trooper. And thank you from me to the audience as well for carrying on the conversation. That was great. So over to Mark.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Ivo. I think this is, I think the fact that we were cut off was a great disappointment, but I think we were all very aware of the real potential of the ideas that you had thrown out to us early on. And when you weren't here, a huge number of elements came out, a huge number of ideas came out, which we wanted to ask you about. And I think it shows the real rich Croatian historiography, which is out there and which is so, a lot of it is inaccessible, I suppose, because it's in Croatia, but you have managed, with your works, you have made it much more accessible to us. So I think it does suggest to us the value of looking at Croatia as a case study in many ways. I would simply say, I don't really want to go on very much. I would simply say that on the basis of this seminar, it would be wonderful to have you back to talk about some other aspects of Croatia's Jewish culture in the 20th century. I mean, I think the question showed that there was a huge amount that we could benefit from hearing you speak on other aspects beyond the Holocaust, before the Holocaust or in the post-war period. So that's really most of what I want to say, and I think we shall be aiming to have you back when we can get a date which we can all make, and hopefully the connection technologically will be much better that time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mark. I'm really surprised that the connection was cut off, and it happened to me for the first time that I didn't realize that something went wrong. Of course, I saw that something went wrong, but I thought that you would be able to hear me. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I think that I see that you had a fruitful discussion without me, and that is well, that is very good outcome, and I'm looking forward to see you again. Thank you very much, Southampton, for giving me opportunity to be together, to be there with you. Yeah, and thank to all participants who were now still there, 24 of them, and I think that the good prove that this is worth of doing that. That's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. Joan, did you want to say anything, or?
No, I think that's it. You've said it all for me. Just thank you to everybody again for what turned out to be an extremely stimulating set of conversations despite the technological mishap. And thanks everybody for your patience, and Professor Goldstein for talking to us and sharing your research with us. Thank you very much. I hope there are other occasions where we can carry on the conversation.